Okay, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. I'm Suni from Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. I'm one of the co-chairs. Together with me, I have Chris. He's also one of the co-chairs for the interest group, Libraries for Research Data interest group. So I've just put in a link for our session page. And thanks very much, Chris, for sharing the link to the collaborative notes. So we would appreciate if you could go to the collaborative notes and share with us who you are, where you are from, and at the same time, we are doing an open call for nominations for new co-chairs to this interest group. So feel free to put in any nominations that you might have for your colleagues or for yourself. So big welcome to today's session. So for today's session, we have David, who is one of our presenters, but he is sending his apologies because of last minute work emergency. So he has provided us with a recording. So we'll be playing a recording. But because we have Sandra, one of the presenters with us today, and she would be able to do a live presentation. So we'll have Sandra to do her presentation first, followed by playing the recording from David. And then for Manish, Professor Manish Parashar, the IEEE Editor-in-Chief Transactions on Parallel and Distributed Systems. He's not able to join us last minute because of some unexpected flight schedule issues. So he has, however, shared with us his slides, and we'll try our best to help him summarize his presentation. So that will be the likely flow for today's presentations. But before that, we'll just do perhaps a brief interest group status update before we do the presentations. And of course, after the presentations, we would like to have lots of discussions. So feel free to participate in that questions, answers, and I'm sure Sandra, Chris, and the rest of the participants here would be able to help chip in. So maybe I will share my screen. Let me just share my screen let me see if I can do this. All right. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, looks good.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So this is our group, Libraries for Research Data Interest Group. And we do have quite a big group. Are we one of the largest group, Chris?
We are. It's very funny too, because we have a small crowd. We usually have about 50 to 100 people here. So, but we are the largest group at RDA. Yeah,
it is. So I guess we have many librarians who may be interested in what is discussed in this group as well. So a little bit about what we have discussed in the past. So if you can see, we have a really long list of members here, and we have had this. Let me see. I think when I first joined as a co-chair, we did this webinar exploring past, present, and future outcomes of the RDA Libraries for Research Data Interest Group. And there were presentations on the 23 things libraries for research data, top 10 fair data and software things, etc. So we were also asking for feedback on what could be potential interest to be discussed. And I think there were some interest, in fact, quite a fair bit of interest on open science. So in fact, we had a follow-up session in the last plenary where we did open science initiatives in Asia. Yesterday, I was at another breakout session, and there was a mention of this open science initiatives in Asia session, and I think there was a lot of interest from the participants of this session. So it will be great if you can also take a look at this, the recording. There is a recording here on open science initiatives in Asia, where there were several presentations from Australian-based speaker Sanderson Oni, who is doing some report on the regional, especially where he highlighted how things are going on in Southeast Asia. And then there was a presenter from China, where there was some sharing on the context in China. And then Dr. Chuang from Taiwan, and of course, Dr. Megumi and Dr. Nobutada from Japan on the context on the Social Science Japan Data Archive in Japan. So, so this is where we have come so far, and today we are very proud to put together the session, Digital Badging for Research Data and Software. I think arising from the open science discussions, there was so much interest about, so what could be incentives, what could motivate people, what could help make that recognition a little bit more structured. So we have the privilege to have Sandra today. So Sandra, I will kick off with Sandra Gersing, who will be sharing with us on software assessment and badging. So she's the co-chair for Go Fair US, Go Build. So is there anything that you would like to add on, Chris, before we kickstart the session with Sandra?
Yeah, we did also mention that we're looking for new co-chairs, right?
Oh,
did
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So there is a link in this page, which Chris has provided in the chat, where you could give us suggestions. You could nominate yourself, or you could nominate your colleagues, and then yeah, we could follow up with them and to invite them to participate in this call for new co-chairs for this interest group, which is the Libraries for Research Data interest group. Yeah, thanks, Chris.
Yeah. And I would just add that I think we continue to want have interest, or we're interested as co-chairs in expanding, I guess, like the really regional diversity in research in this libraries group. So the Libraries for Research Data group, and it's been very, if you look at the numbers of where people are coming, it tends to be a lot of sort of North America and Europe, and you know, so some just really like many of those sort of countries, and we're looking to expand, you know, really just to try and be more inclusive. So with that in mind, you know, if you have suggestions, we'd be very interested in you know, just to being more inclusive in this group. So
yeah, thanks very much, Chris. So I will stop sharing my screen and I will hand it over to Sandra.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the kind invitation. It's really great being here. So let me share my screen. And sorry for clicking directly on no. If I would have known that I can also suggest other nominations than myself, because I love the topic you have, but if I take another RDA group on, I think it gets a little bit too much for me. But I'm happy to nominate other people or suggest other people who are really, you know, well fitting to this group. And yeah, so
that makes me happy, Sandra.
Yeah.
I saw
Well,
the no initially.
I can put a yes, you can contact me, but the no was for myself. I'm sorry. I really like to deliver when I agree to something. So I think at the moment I'm on the top of what I can deliver in this group. Okay, so let me take to the slideshow. You see it now full screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. And just also one hint, I'm not so good in looking at the chat while I'm giving a presentation, but I'm happy if you have a question in between, just interrupt me. That is totally fine. So I will talk about software assessment and badging, how we approach it with the Go Build pillar, which is part of the Go Fair US. And let me see. So yeah, so the organization is that we are 3 co-chairs. So Chris Erdmann, who's also the co-chair of this session, Laurie Haag from Mighty Red Barn, and me. And we looked at it in a certain stakeholder form, because we thought about platforms, and especially platforms that support tools, software, and data, like Comsys, Zenodo, GitHub, who have the potential then really to have effect directly on more software and more data than if you go for one specific tool. So that was the idea, to say, if we look into badging, maybe it's good to approach it in a way that platforms can help with giving these badges out, and help really tools and data and researchers as really the humans behind it to reach this badging, and have also, and of course we need to have a look at the existing assessment services and tools, because over the last 3-4 years, I think there was really the development a lot in FAIR, also with different FAIR services to support some automatic, some manual tasks, to make it a little bit clearer. So the goals we looked at was, first of all, identify the platforms that we want to approach. And I talked about examples already, like GitHub, Zenodo, Comsys, and which are really into sharing and sharing of data and software, maybe one of the both. And then what is really the key component of a FAIR adoption and implementation? And it's not always the same for the different parts. So I mean, we have the FAIR for research software, for example. We have a group FAIR for virtual research environment, which includes science gateways. We look at FAIR for hardware. We look, there are a lot of different things. And so we need to have a focus there to start somewhere. And also we looked at, okay, let's try to start with maybe 5 early adopter platforms, and then really explore what means that we have these badging certification frameworks and tools. What is fitting to FAIR, because there are different possibilities. So GitHub has already a couple of badges, and I like their system for quite a few things they have. And we have to find out whether that is also good for the FAIR assessment, because they don't have it for FAIR yet, but they're looking also into it. And of course, one of our stakeholder groups are really the researchers, because we don't do it just because we want the software and data that they're FAIR. We want that the researchers can include it in their own workflow, and that it's not a lot of burden for them, and that they can use it for software platforms and other stakeholders. And yeah, the last but not least goal is to list and communicate the remaining challenges, because so we planned this group for 2 years with different working groups with different stages. And we are sure that we are not solving it in 2 years. It would be fantastic. I would love if we could do that, but we are realistic. So we probably won't share it in 2 years, won't solve it in 2 years. We will share it, of course. We share it from the beginning. So these are the initial groups we contacted. So I mentioned already GitHub, Zenodo, and Comsys. PressQt is a preservation quality tool I'm a co-PI of, and that looks really in different stages of software and data preservation. The UK Software Sustainability Institute, Pangeo, another top. So Chris will talk a little bit more about it in the session. The Netherlands Eastside Center is really also very at the front of fair assessment and fair development. Utrecht University, the same, the US Research Software Engineer Association. So I mentioned already the Fair for Research Software Group, which has their first they have the publication there at the point where they're ramping down at the moment as a working group. GoFair US, we are one of the pillars with GoBuild, the Science Gateways Community Institute in the US, so I'm one of the co-PIs there. The American Geophysical Union, Chris is, and now Chris, I blank on your role. I'm sorry. You can say it.
Well, I'm the data steward essentially for AGU, yeah.
So that is great. And we have the Oak Ridge National Lab. The San Diego Supercomputing Center has a lot of, also besides that the GoFair US is located also there, a lot of work going on in FAIR. Such bionetworks, yeah, you see now I call all of them also bionetworks, knowledge models, AMBERS, Life Lab, and PyOpenSci. So we contacted them all, and the idea was that we have this mixture of grassroots and top-down approach, because grassroots are, for example, this activities with the FAIR group, with RDA working groups, with USRSE, and a little bit top-down approach, what is not a bad thing, is like with some organized activities from the Software Sustainability Institute to set really some programs up and to be supporters there. Because if you have both, we have seen that in communities, it's really working together well. And for some things, it's good to have funding to be able to kick something off. And that was the idea with the initial groups. And the current activities are really around monthly meetings. We have currently a summer break until August, but we are working remotely on a couple of things. So for example, on the survey. So I will talk more about the survey with the FAIR for Software gaps and discovery and challenges. And we did some platform reviews first, also in regard of badging and FAIR. We are planning a workshop, so the rough planning is there. If you are interested, you can contact us if you want to participate. And we are working on a GoFair blog post about this group and what the current activities are. And I go a little bit more into the survey, and I know that you feel probably a little bit like the person on the left side sometimes when you see a survey. I know we do a lot of surveys these days. There's not only Zoom fatigue, but there's some survey fatigue. And so, when you have nothing left to give. But it's really a good way. We will see, we really want to find out what is necessary, and it's a short survey. It's something you can fill out in 5 to 10 minutes. And we want to inspire and be excited about this topic, and I hope you will be too. So the typical questions we start with just to understand a little bit, and we will define it better. So you see here, the first question would be, what discipline are you from or representing? So for example, when I get that question, I mostly say computational sciences. Even so, I work a lot also in biology with groups, or also in physics. So that would be my main discipline, so from the research I'm doing. Or what community are you from or representing? That gets a little bit more complicated. And so I would mention a couple of more things there, like the Science Gateways Community Institute, USRC. You see, you have several choices there, and then it really, we want to hear, how do you really select software? What are the criteria? The 3 top criteria. Whom are you listening to? And we heard a lot like word of mouth, or that someone in the community who's really a leader and suggests or works with a certain software, or you have read a paper where the results are really interesting, and yeah, the software is cited or referenced in a way that it fits to your work. And then we go to the next stage. So what are the needs for the different 4 principles of FAIR for research software principles? And that is a little bit more difficult, something to think about. So we give the examples, what is defined there, and would there be something you would miss, you would like to suggest? And we have that for our principles. So that is a survey in general. So we are working at the moment to make it in a nice form. We are reformulating it a little bit after we got the first feedback, but also happy to get, of course, in this session feedback, whether we should ask additionally something, whether we should ask it differently. And yeah, in the Go Build working group, we had already 2 platform reviews, discussions about it. And one on the findings from consensus was that it would be really nice for the users to have a workflow to prepare their software entries. So it takes a little bit longer. It's just not only the upload, but it would be like, instead of just an upload, it would take people like a minute or 1.5, because they add a little bit more data. And so there could be a peer review of software, so that researchers see really the benefit with the added data to software packages. And maybe in the platform to have something like ways to promote the packages, so that it's clear, oh, this package has been added, or these features has been added, there's a new version. So that was the idea, with maybe community forums, something to discuss with news. So, and we had also the discussion, like, is batching software versus having papers something that is interesting for researchers? We think yes, and maybe having something like a checklist to say, yeah, when I put my software there, I have added these in a certain platform, I have added these characteristic or principle of FAIR to it. And the goal is really to make researchers see the advantage of the FAIR principles. So the same, we had the discussions with developers from Zenodo, and they improved already the discoverability. So they used an improved schema for Google searches. So Google Scholar is not standardized, though, but they adapted it to it so that at least everything in Zenodo can also be easier found by Google Scholar. But until now, their own impression is that software is mostly still found by word of mouth or paper. So that is a goal to work on, that it's really the discoverability and findability is better. So the goal is also here, make researchers see the advantage of FAIR procedures. And of course, we're looking into community building around Go Build. So everyone is welcome to participate. You can sign up at this URL at the Go FAIR US to get involved. We have a code of conduct, and we would be happy to have you. And we work at the moment on publishing our first blog post where people can give their feedback. And as I said, we are working on a workshop, and we will send out the survey. So we would be happy if you would like to answer the survey. And with this, I have thanks for your attention, and I'm open for questions and discussions.
Thanks, Sandra. So I think we're gonna wait until later for discussion for questions, but I think if anyone has any questions in the chat or comment or questions or comments, please leave them in the chat. But we were going to also share David's talk. He wasn't able to be here, but he recorded a talk for us, and so I will bring that up here. And hopefully everyone can see that. Can you see? Okay.
Yes, now we can see. And sorry for going over time, I realized.
Hello.
Sorry.
Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you're logging in from. I sincerely apologize for not being able to join synchronously. Unavoidable conflicts have arisen. My name is David Meller. I'm the Director of Policy from the Center for Open Science, and I'm sharing our experiences and philosophies around recognizing increased transparency with open science badges. My slides are available here, and for disclosure, our funders and all of our financial information is available through those links provided at the bottom. So our mission at the Center for Open Science is to increase the openness, integrity, and reproducibility of scientific research. And we have a theory of change that we try to apply in order to achieve this mission. First, we focus on making tools that enable best practices, and then work on making them as fun and easy to use as possible. Only when practices are possible to be completed can they actually be completed. Then we think about ways and facilitate community connections so that these practices become more normal. When one sees peers doing ideal practices, those serve as a model to follow and a recognition of what's expected within community conduct. Finally, we think about ways to incentivize or specifically reward open science practices. And when communities are ready, those should become required or expected. We see the badging project as crucial to the middle of that pyramid, where these activities make open science practices more visible. Each one of these icons is an opportunity to demonstrate and emulate a peer doing activity. They serve as an example of how to do it or how to do it well. And that recognition is itself a reward for doing something a little bit pro-social. When we see the Open Science Badging Program take off, especially in the social sciences, and Psych Science is a leading journal that applies these encouraged practices, over time they become nearly ubiquitous. This is a screenshot from a recent table of contents from the journal Psych Science that doesn't have any mandate or requirement to make these activities a condition of publication. But you can see that open data, open materials, or pre-specification of research plans through pre-registration are nearly one of those three, or sometimes all of those three activities are ubiquitous. We evaluated the uptake of these policies through these practices after a policy change at the journal Psychological Science around 2014. They implemented both the badging program and overall more strict requirements. So this isn't any sort of experimental manipulation, but we were able to look to see how the community was responding to increased calls for transparency by comparing what was happening in the journal Psych Science to several comparable journals within the discipline. The vertical axis shows a percentage of articles that reported that data were available in a repository. And each line represents one of the 4 journals that were scored. And Psych Science showing the the visual recognition that these data where available saw a dramatic increase in the rates of data sharing. And that trend has continued over the past 7 years. But a comparable rise was not through this time seen in other journals. And this is only the data that were reportedly available by the authors in the manuscript. We were also able to go back and check the degree to which those data sets were actually available and how many of them were complete and usable. So of all the articles that reported that data were available, whether or not, regardless of whether they had a badge on the journal page, we were able to go back and see how many actually had data available. So for those that did have a badge, in the first line that I'm about to show, all of them did actually have data available, but not all of them had the correct, usable, and complete data set. Those were about 75% of the articles, which is not great, and shows room for improvement. However, compared to other articles that stated that data were available, a majority of them did not actually have data available or did not have a complete and usable data set. And this could be for a variety of reasons: good editorial checking by the journal, precise criteria specified by the expectations of being rewarded a badge. For example, those could be two different ways that could show up in the results that we see here. But we know that the badge itself doesn't serve as the direct incentive for taking on one of these practices, especially when it's new to a community. So this is the results of a study that reported the results of a randomized controlled trial where one was offered a badge for depositing a data set. Folks were randomly assigned to receive a badge or to not receive an offer of a badge, and it didn't make a difference over the 6 months that that effort had entailed. And we think that's simply not enough time to see these norms percolate throughout a community and see examples from peers that these are practices that are widely undertaken, as compared to what you see in table of contents that have been doing it for 1 year, 2 year, 3 years. The practice slowly becomes more and more ubiquitous, again, without mandates, which are sometimes quite difficult or impossible to impose, depending on the organization. We also think that the precision and the specificity of the criteria are helpful. So just asking to share a data set is a little bit vague, but giving precise instructions and what it means to share a data set with its code book or data dictionary or description of all variables lowers barriers to actually complying with that as it provides examples and instructions. There are a couple of different ways that journals implement the badging program. In this case, there's the disclosure model where it's simply an author assertion that these activities are taking place. And as long as there is a credible link to a persistent online repository, that can be awarded by the editorial process through the journal. Or there are more and more journals that are conducting more thorough reviews, making sure that those data sets are actually complete and usable. Those standards for what that precisely means are evolving and growing over time, all the way up to computational reproducibility, where a third party downloads data, code, and attempts to run the analyses performed in the manuscript. If you want to see journals that do that, we evaluate journals and their data sharing policies on topfactor.org. And that's considered a level 3 policy of the data disclosure or the data transparency standard. We think that there's a room for improvement for how these open science practices are captured in article metadata. Largely, that is not captured by article metadata these days. There is a variety of different workflows for implementing a badging program. It often falls back to sharing of Word documents and fillable PDFs back and forth, or instructions to provide DOIs or other identifiers in certain places in the article manuscript. One proposed method that we are discussing with partners at Crossref is using the existing infrastructure in the Crossmark widget to showcase when some of these open science practices are taking place. So here's just a mock-up of what the Crossmark widget looks like right now and what could be added with data, or whether or not the work was pre-registered, a little visual icon showing up in those areas with more material, more information being made available as one clicks through those drop-down menus. It could even show up on the widget before any preview becomes available. Top statements are a standardized disclosure process, asking researchers the degree to which or whether or not any of these open science practices have taken place. So asking, are data available, are materials, or analytical code, was the work pre-registered? Asking that in a standardized way is possible, of course, and we recommend language that are derived from the transparency and openness promotion guidelines, and those standardized disclosure templates are available on the Open Science Framework. Here's a link to one example of a RMB formatted top statement document on the Open Science Framework. One visualization is how that could look as well. So we take a systems approach to addressing culture change and incentivizing open science practices. But it's important to reiterate that these are not new ideas. The way to practice science transparently and the application of independent direct replications, it should not be considered a novel or controversial idea. These really go back to the roots of the implication of the expectations of the process of scientific discovery and confirmation. I go back often to the motto of the Royal Society Open Science that says, on the word of no one should evidence be taken. And with that, I will see my time, and I'd be happy to correspond offline on any questions that arise or any questions about the Open Science Badging Program, of course.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully David's audio and everything, the video was fine and you could follow along. And I have the slides, I'll share them in the chat. And again, if you have any comments or questions, put them in the chat. And I think I will let Suni actually speak to the third talk that we had. So.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, thanks very much, Chris. So yeah, hello, everybody. The presenter, Manish, Professor Manish, is not able to join us today. He sends his apologies due to some unexpected flight delays. So he has sent us his presentation slides. So we will try our best to see how we can help him to summarize the presentation, and I might need to ask for Sandra's help with that. So before that, maybe I would like to share with everyone. By doing some research on this topic, digital badging for research data and software had helped us to identify some of the speakers, including Manish himself. So I thought I would like to share screen on this article. I hope you can see my screen all right?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. So I'm going to just copy and paste the URL to this article that is written by Professor Manish Parashar himself. So he is, let me see if I could just go to, let me see, just this one. Yeah. Yeah, so Professor Manish Parashar is IEEE Editor-in-Chief Transactions on Parallel and Distributed Systems. So for today's presentation, he would like to share with us on the reproducibility aspects in his role as the editor-in-chief for this particular journal, where he says that reproducibility is fundamental to scientific and technical research and has taken an increased urgency in recent years, impacting society's trust in research results. So recognizing this importance and urgency, the IEEE Transactions on Parallel and Distributed Systems remains committed to enabling reproducible research through transparency and availability and potential reuse of code and data associated with its publications. So he would like to share a little bit about the journal's reproducibility initiative and to discuss activities and experiences as part of this initiative. So this article, where I've just shared the link with you, he talked a little bit about this initiative. So I thought it's useful for me to share this link with you. Now I will proceed to share with you his slides. All right. Okay, so yeah, for his this work that he's doing, I think he is sharing the background on the direction provided by the Congress, where the NSF has asked for this committee to define what it means to reproduce and replicate a study, explore issues related to reproducibility and replicability across science and engineering, and assess any impact of these issues on the public's trust in science. So he has highlighted these 2 points on reproducibility and replicability. So a little bit on the reproducibility would be, it is about obtaining consistent results using the same input data, by following the same computational steps, methods, and codes, and conditions of analysis. So this definition is synonymous with computational reproducibility, and the terms are used interchangeably in this report. On the other hand, replicability is about obtaining consistent results across studies aimed at answering the same scientific question. So the difference between the two is the second one is focusing on across studies, each of which has obtained its own data. 2 studies may be considered to have replicated if they obtain consistent results, given the level of uncertainty inherent in the system under study. Would Sandra or Chris like to add on to this part about the difference between the 2?
Yeah, so I think about reproducibility, replicability, reusability, there was a lot of discussions, especially in the last 3 to 5 years. I would say it's a little bit this topic. It's I like the definitions here. I think it's really there are different definitions a little bit out there for the different stages. What means reproducibility, reusability, replicability, and I think Nathan found a really good difference here, because with computational science, it's easier to say you're using the same input data, you have the computational steps. So we heard from David about, for example, psychological experience or experiments, and that is not the same definition then. So because we have to put in it in with statistical errors. So I think this is really about not statistics or methods which allow a range of different results. This is really about the computational method. That is what he says here. That is what he's looking at.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will only add that. So yeah, I agree too. But I would just say that we were inspired by a conversation with the atmospheric, so NCAR, the Atmospheric Research Center, in Colorado. And the library there actually, and some of the other researchers steered us in the direction of using replicability in our guidance at the American Geophysical Union, just because it was more achievable, and our editors appreciated that, and so our guidance steered in that direction when we had conversations about this. So,
thank you. Would Sandra be familiar with this IEEE Committee on Open Science and Reproducibility?
So I know that it exists. I'm sorry, I have not the current information, but I think it's really the key activities is like checking over the report, whether there are more, the most relevant recommendations, and that they really want to do what a lot of, we are also at the moment looking into the working groups at Go Fair and at Go Build, so that the key issues, there are some key issues which need really to look deeper at to ensuring reproducibility. The key recommendations are a little bit, so sorry, I haven't seen it before. So, but it looks like there's really the strategic, so to have an implementation plan, looking at the infrastructure, which is important. And what I really like here, it's a reproducibility communication plan, because that fair is a lot about how you communicate it to the stakeholders and to the user groups. And the coordination with other society organizations and stakeholders is really important, because we have seen that together we are addressing similar topics with different stakeholders, maybe some, niches, but it's really good to coordinate how we looked, for example, with other groups, what have done, for example, the for research software group already. You don't want to reinvent what has been already done in the community, and they're looking at this also. And to implement a task force, to establish a task force to implement recommendations. That sounds very powerful. I think it's like our building working groups.
I would add, I think it's interesting that you don't see the UNESCO open science recommendations here. I think that's something that's largely on our radar. I think it from our perspective, so the United States is not involved in UNESCO, but that, I think the UNESCO recommendations are very high up on our radar, and so we've sort of reconciled the National Academy's report and UNESCO and looked at other recommendations too. So we want to be broad, and when I say we, it's actually not just the American Geophysical Union. It's part of this project I'll mention later, the NASA Open Science, the Transform to Open Science. But we're really, I think the UNESCO Open Science recommendations are real big driver in our future direction. And I also wanted to highlight something that I thought was great on this list, is the workflows aspect. And it's interesting because workflows in sort of sharing your workflows, that is happens more. I'd say there still has to be a lot of training around how to share workflows, and one of the people that's really a driver in that space is Carol Goebel. She may have presented in one of the other sessions, but workflows, really, it just captures all your when we're looking at replicability, it captures, your work throughout the process, and sharing that. It's not so much done to the extent it's done in the life sciences, in the earth and space sciences. So it's interesting. And whenever we have these conversations about workflows, it's really moves to sharing notebooks. So your notebook science, which is also something we're looking at the American Geophysical Union, which is moving to basically it's not journal publishing, it's notebook. It's sharing in notebooks, notebooks is the format. That's the future. And that's what we believe, and I think that will really help us with sort of some of the other dynamic aspects of sharing open science. And so we're right on the cusp of exploring that at that and working with the community in an open way on moving sharing notebooks. And I think we've all been waiting for that for many years. I think we're really getting behind that too. So anyways, those are some things that stood out to me.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, something that caught my eye would be the support for data code submission and evaluation. Yeah, I understand that for papers, there's recognition that will be reflected in, for example, platforms such as Publons. So people are recognized for doing paper reviews. How about data? So when people are involved in doing, for example, peer review of data and software, would they be recognized as well? How would they be recognized? Yeah, so who's going to do the evaluation? Yeah, so I'm not sure how that will be taking on as this discussion moves on. Would anyone have any idea of how that would be taking place for various journals? Who are the evaluators of such data and codes, and before they get their badges?
Well, I can share.
Yeah.
So happy to share. Is that it's not standardized. So we do, it's very much driven by when you get down to sort of the discipline and journal level. You get communities are very proactive in looking at reviewing data, reviewing software. It is a requirement. It's really, you cannot publish at AGU unless you share your data. In fact, I have to tell a group that has an embargo that they cannot publish with us. And so we're pretty strict about that because, that's an underlying condition to be able to share the data so we can inspect it. I think what we're also, it's sort of slowly coming online is the software, and we're having conversations around that. Like, what does it mean? And I think, like we did have also, again, people moving forward and sharing software, but I think we still needed conversations on how exactly the separate communities in AGU would do that. But all this is sort of being required, and we do, again, it's not standardized. Some reviewers decide to do this more so than others. And in some cases, some communities, some editors choose to be more flexible in how we handle these scenarios. So, at AGU, we also have a community that shares there's proprietary challenges to work through. And so these are the growing pains, but the next years will be, it really, and I think this is where we also want to head, is that we often do encounter authors that will say we're going to another journal because the other journal will look past this and it only says encourages data and software. And we really need to move there as a community. And I think that's where we also work with all the journals, the publishers and societies, is trying to move everyone forward into sort of requiring this as well. But we have that challenge as well, that people sort of sidestep this sometimes to go to other journals. Anyways, Julian has a hand up.
Yeah, Julian.
I think it's a false question because reviewers don't do reviews for recognition. I mean, you can have the best problems profile ever, it won't get you a job. So it's not really relevant, at least not at this stage, to think about recognizing reviewers, I think.
Thanks, Julian. All right, so we'll just continue with the slides. So a little bit on their journal initiative, a little bit more. Yeah.
Sydney, I just wanted to say, I agree with Julian, and he just reminded me of the fact that we're also seeing basically staff being hired to do this work too, like that, to help with this process, because the stress that is on reviewers, as Julian says. And I think maybe that's what I can talk about later as far as recognition and rewards, and as far as the Transform to Open Science as well project.
Okay, thanks. So the journal has piloted the peer review of code and data associated with published articles. Authors can earn a badge, a reproducibility badge, by submitting associated code for peer review. So they have 3 types of badges we can see here. Okay, code available, code reviewed, and code reproduced. So available badge would be the code including any associated data and documentation provided by the authors is reasonable and complete, and can potentially be used to support reproducibility of the published results. For the reviewed code badge, the code including any associated data and documentation provided by the authors is reasonable and complete, runs to produce the outputs described, and can support reproducibility of the published results. And the last one is being piloted. So there is a plan to revise the badges to align with the NISO recommendation. So I think if Sandra has something to add on the NISO recommendation for badges, I think it'll be a great time to share with us briefly about that as well.
So I can say something about the badges offered at the moment. So that is, for example, how supercomputing also approaches it. And I talked with some of the reviewers. And so even reproducibility is a big step also for supercomputing. So where they follow this pattern. Everyone would like to support it, but the reviewers told me also that they're like, it's a lot of work, to check it, whether to come really to the batch code reproduced. And I can see that. You have to install it or to have the platform that you can really follow all the steps and also understand the results. So I think we go in the right direction here with these badges, but I'm not sure whether the last stage is something that is feasible in the long run because of the work, the reviewer's work you need there. I might be wrong there, because I know that all the reviewers I talked to were all very thrilled about it, but also see that it's a lot of effort if you have to do it not only for one, but for example, for 3 or 4 submissions. But I'm happy to hear from the audience also what their opinion would be about it if they have to review it, for example. Because as Julian said, you don't get real credit for putting in the work into this review. I think it's the right way to go. I only don't know how to make it easier for the reviewers. That would be my point, kind of.
Mm.
So what are opinions about that?
Mm.
May I?
Yeah, Julian.
I have some experience with JOSS, so the Journal of Open Source Software, and there it's so basically it was refused because my code was not good enough for them, right? And then we publish it somewhere else because we had to publish it, but it's still so the process of reviewing code is very different from reviewing paper, and as you said, it's very time intensive. And if the code is the main part, then it deserves more than the badges, I think. Otherwise, people won't do it. But for most of things which will go into a notebook, it's very simple. So you have different degrees of code review. Some things are very simple, which you just have to check that it works, basically, that you can run it now and not in 10 years, while you have some specific review system for good coding and long-term maintainability and these kind of things that will go beyond. Right? And I don't think we should mix the two, otherwise it's too, we're talking to different kind of researchers.
Thanks, Julian. Does anyone else in the audience would like to chip in?
Hi, this is Manish. I managed to connect.
Oh, Manish. Oh, yes, yeah. He is
I
the
recognize
presenter.
the slide.
Yes. Yeah. Would you like to take us through your presentation now?
I'll be happy to do that.
Yeah.
I'm in the airport lounge, but I'll try my best.
All right. Fantastic. Very happy to see you here. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the audience for their patience. I'm sorry I had a travel snafu that caused this problem. So I wanted to talk to you about what we're doing in the IEEE transactions on parallel distributed systems to support reproducibility. So these slides just give you an overview of what we have done and some of the challenges we faced. So a lot of this was motivated by a report that came out of the National Academies for Science, Engineering, and Medicine. And they had a study funded by the National Science Foundation to address reproducibility and replicability in science. And the report is a very interesting read, but they also had some interesting recommendations for publications. And we at IEEE Computer Society created an ad hoc group to see how we could address this. This slide talks to you a little bit about the report and the definitions they put forward for reproducibility and replicability. And we were really targeting reproducibility as per this definition. And there's a URL at the bottom of the slide that talks about, that points you to that report. Could you go to the next slide, please? In summer, fall of 2020, I believe, we created an ad hoc committee in the Computer Society to start seeing how could we do this, right? So we started looking at the recommendations and try to see how can the IEEE Computer Society support reproducibility? How can they respond to the recommendations in that report that came out? And some of the recommendations are listed on the slide. But one thing we did was to see if we can start piloting this, some of the recommendations as part of the publications in IEEE. So some of the other recommendations were thinking strategically about it. And an important part of it was building the infrastructure to support it. When we piloted this in IEEE TPDS, transactions and parallel distributed systems, there was absolutely no infrastructure to support it. workflows needed, the review processes needed, the infrastructure needed to support that review. The badging infrastructure did not exist. So how do you create that? And then how do you coordinate it across the rest of the other publications and across the publications? And then how do you start socializing and creating the incentive structures and getting the authors to submit it? So it was a lot of things that needed to be done. And the current state of the art at IEEE was quite ad hoc and a sort of best effort. And so we sort of recommended that we should do this in a more structured and deliberate manner moving forward. And there's a URL at the bottom of the slide that goes to the report. There was a nice survey we did of all the publications and workshops to see what they were doing to support reproducibility. And the data from that survey is also at that URL. The report is there, the data is there, and a lot of the artifacts that came out of that are posted on that URL at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. So we started piloting this in the transactions, and we said, let's start by giving, by supporting reproducibility by offering badges as an incentive for researchers to submit code and data in support of their publications, right? So we had initially 2 badges, code available and code reviewed. And then in addition to that, we added a code reproduce badge that we have just started. And so it was really creating the badges, creating the support structures to review the badge and to create the community around it. So it was a slow process. And in addition to that, we had a committee by the NISO, which started thinking, what should these badges look across all publications? And so we had, so we participated in that, and that report is also out there. But clearly, this is a broader initiative because a lot of publications are trying to incentivize reproducibility and using badging as one mechanism to help do that. Next slide. So in TPDS, what we do is when the author submits a paper, they have the option of submitting code and data. We review that, and once a paper is published, we then add a badge to it depending on the results of a review. We were saying, okay, code reviewed and code available is relatively easier to review. But because of the nature of parallel distributed computing, which looks at large scale system level and or application level research, it's often very hard to evaluate code for reproducibility. Because what happens is you need special hardware or special systems, large number of processors, large data sets, and this is not practical to do very often. And so how do we evaluate reproducibility? So we said, let's try to take a different approach. Let's crowdsource it. So what we do is we let authors, often they are PhD students or researchers or postdocs, they submit critique papers where they evaluate the paper and submit their experiences in that evaluation, right? And what we do is we review that critique paper and then we attach it to the original paper. And we give a DOI to it so that the PhD student now has a transaction paper that they can point to, which looks very good on their resume, for instance, right? And when we use these critique papers collectively to evaluate what the reproducibility of that original research is, and when we did find out that there's enough critiques that validate the reproducibility of the results, we then give it a reproducibility badge, research reproducible badge, right? And so that allows us to really create a process that's a win-win and allows us to evaluate research that's of this kind right, where you need special kind of resources to do this. We have also partnered with national resource providers that provide us resources to run those applications. Right? And so that allows us to do. So we've been doing this as a pilot with, so one of the largest conferences in computing is called supercomputing. And it happens every year. It has about 10,000 plus attendees, right? And so what we take is we take the best paper in that, and we said, okay, can you help us reproduce the results? And we crowdsourced this, and we said, okay, here's an issue where we have the original paper, we have the set of critique papers that evaluated the results and made sure that they were reproducible, and we give it a badge. Right? And so that's a nice way for this kind of research areas where it's hard to reproduce to be able to give the badging. And so this pilot has been very successful, and we're trying to scale it up now and create this as a standard way to do it. So again, it's a nice way to leverage a win-win incentive structure to replicate, use the community to evaluate the replicability or reproducibility of research. So we're trying to now scale this up in TPDS.
Excuse me, Manish.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, we're closing in on our discussion time. We had some time for discussion, so I'm wondering if if in a few minutes we can move on to.
Absolutely. We can also, this is my last slide.
Okay, and we can also stay on for some time for discussion.
No, that's absolutely fine. Okay. Sorry, it's, as I said, I apologize for being late. I think this is my last slide, so I'm done.
Oh, great. Okay, sorry. You're done.
I'm done. So I hope that was helpful. I'm sorry I was not able to participate fully, but if there's any questions for me, you can email me here or anywhere else I can contribute. I'll be very happy to. Thank you for your patience.
Thanks, Manish, for a great talk. So when I try to, jump together with Suni a little bit on your slides, I also reported back, and I'm happy to hear your opinion about it. When I talked about supercomputing, and that some of the reviewers really we all support the reproducibility, and I think the approach is the right one, but that it's also really a lot of effort to do really the badging at the real reproducibility for the reviewer themselves. So do you think that the code reproduced, do you envision something more automatic there? Or because at the moment I see of course the benefit, and I'm totally with you there. I support this. But I also see that it's hard or a lot of effort.
It is a lot of effort, right? So it has to be a community, because at the end of the day, it's value for the community by having research that's reproducible, right? So it is an effort from the authors. They have to put in a lot of effort to make their code in such a form that people can reproduce it. And it's a lot of effort from the reviewer side to reproduce it, right? And that's why we want to make sure there's an incentive for both. So for the authors, you get a badge, you get this prestige. And for the reviewers, they get a paper that they can cite, that gets published. And for a young researcher, that's very valuable. And so that's sort of what you're trying to create. But I don't disagree with you. It is a lot of effort. But I don't know of any other way to get reproducibility and the practice of reproducibility, more of a norm.
Oh, I totally agree. I only wanted to say, I'm totally with you. And on the other hand, I'm like, we don't want to lose the community because they're like, this is too much effort. Yeah.
Exactly. So you have to create the right incentives so they want to do it.
Julian, you put up your hand.
I had a more technical approach or question here is I've just went through the NISO documents that I finally found after 3 clicks. And there they mention a lot about what metadata should be there and so on. And I wonder why they don't just use the open badge system, which has been developed for the last 15 years and is mature and should work for all what people are looking for.
Right. So I think if I understood the question you're saying is that when we look at the metadata, why aren't we using something else, and why did we build those prescriptions or that schema for the metadata that we use? Is that correct, Julian?
Yeah, and the question of why we are reinventing the wheel here. So open data, the open badge metadata schema is apparently just filling all what you need.
Absolutely. I think it is more of our ignorance, and you're right, we should not reproduce it. We started with our understanding in the NICER group, and maybe we were just not aware of what you're mentioning, but you're right. We should increase that awareness and not reinvent the wheel. So you're absolutely right. We should have been more aware.
Chris?
Yeah, Julian, I don't know, in the conversations we have at American Geophysical Union around badges, I think they're moving more towards leveraging metadata, the link data and other things like that I think actually improve other experiences. And actually Sandra talked about this earlier in the Go Fair part, is that from what we hear with our authors, and sorry, my dog has really strong feelings about this conversation, but as far as like filtering papers that have software or data and particular aspects, we find that that's stronger, like that's a stronger thing like we just hear like that can be a stronger motivational factor. Like your papers will not be read as much, will not be guess researched and referenced as much, because of all this sort of additional stuff that you need to share and make discoverable, and allow sort of people to sort of filter based on, well, that does this particular topic have, do these papers have software, do they have data that can reuse? And I think that's been more compelling when I talk to researchers. But
so you will talk against badges?
Not exactly, but I would say that I think I would like to see badges be more dynamic, that I think leveraging sort of the underlying metadata in them is of value, actually. So I think they can be, badges are sort of a sign, but and sort of you can use that as sort of a visualization, and but I think that the underlying metadata is what's key here for discoverability and other functionality.
So
yeah, I've just shared screen for the batch metadata from the NICER recommendation. Yeah, sorry, Manish.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think this is exactly the direction the NICER group is heading, right? This is exactly the conversation we're having. And the idea is that how do you standardize this across publications, right? And you're right, the badge is only as good as the metadata it points to. And the metadata is only as good as the data it points to. And so, badge is just a way of an incentive for the author, because they get something that's visual on their paper, right? But it's just that. It's really the metadata and the data that's behind the metadata that's really valuable.
Well, I just want to say too, like we haven't heard from other people on the call, so maybe we can give others a ability to ask a question or comment. So if any of you have, or you're just listening in, but you have a chance, please ask a question or provide a comment. We really want to hear from you as well. And to give a pause. All right. I hope one of you joins in. But yeah, just wanted to give that chance. but I don't know if we had any additional follow-up. I didn't get a chance to do this before. I put it in the chat, and we didn't know if Manish would be here. So I was going to just speak briefly to the fact that we have an initiative through NASA called the Transform to Open Science, and that has badging. So we're starting off with training 20,000 NASA scientists on open science, but the project will expand out to other societies, other venues. There's open science rewards involved in that, a whole host of other community aspects. It's a big program. And part of that is that the curriculum is core. They'll have advanced aspects, and there is a badging component to that you take the training program, and you take some of the assessment, and then you could either attend a training program or you could do it online. And that's sort of like the standard, becomes like the standard that we can base on. And NASA's going to use this. We're also, there's the conversations happening at the White House with all the other agencies, and we're also having this conversation around the world about expanding this program. So even talking to CERN about doing something next year. So I'm excited about it because I feel like a lot of us in moving open science forward for many years at the grassroots level, this is something that's happening at another level, a agency level. And I think, we're seeing open science really take off now through this initiative, but also, we see it across in Europe, and we'll be working, we work with people at UNESCO, but we work with others in other European projects. So the badging is something that you heard about it before from Sandra. The Mars rover badge is an example, but other badges. So we wanted to work with GitHub to offer that badge, so you could have it on your GitHub repository, but you can put it in other places as well to demonstrate that you've taken this open science training program. So that's a brief intro, but I just wanted to mention that too. That's a badging related program.
So Chris, I'm wearing another hat as in part of the subcommittee on open science. I've heard what NASA is doing. It's very impressive. Thank you.
I didn't know that, man. All right, so you're getting this from another angle, yeah.
No, it's impressive and very comprehensive what our NASA is thinking. It's pretty cool. And this the year of open science that's going on, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I didn't mention that too. So this is also the year of open science will happen next year, and that's part of that sort of big outreach to all these different societies. And we're starting, really, I think that's where we leverage all of our relationships with the American Geophysical Union, with all of the other societies. But it's going to be a really broad group. But we're also sort of connected, talking to the people at UNESCO, and sharing information. And UNESCO's driving towards a year of open science too, and I think it happens like 2 years after. So we're really working together, building off of each other. So this is teamwork.
All right, thank you very much, everyone. I think we are about time, so it'll be good if we can wrap up. I'm really grateful to all the presenters today. Sandra, really grateful for you to be so open and to step in to help chip in for the other presentations. And a big thank you to Manish, despite his unexpected flight schedule delays. He's still able to do the presentation in the airport lobby. Thank you very much, Julian, for the very valuable comments and questions. And thanks, Chris, for chipping in as the co-chair. So we have earlier shared the Google Doc. So thanks very much for filling that out. And for those of you who have indicated where you would be able to share some nominations for the new co-chairs whom we are looking for this interest group. We'll be reaching out to you. If you would like to fill that in a little bit later, please feel free to do so. And I think this whole topic on the digital badging for research data and software is really very timely, because for all the open science work that we are talking about, I think we need to see how that could be incorporated in workflows to make sure that it becomes sustainable over time. So to hear from Manish about doing it through critique papers for papers and from the critique papers giving out the badges, I think that is a good way to provide some kind of recognition to those people who are helping out with this crowdsourcing effort for the research data and software evaluation. So I think we look forward to more of such initiatives. Thank you very much, everybody. Chris, is there anything else that you'd like to chip in?
Yeah, I was just asking Sandra and Manisha if they could share their slides through a link, because I just wanted to tweet out some of this from our session too. So if you can provide that, maybe we don't have enough time here, but you can email it to me and I can share. Maybe Manish, it's hard for you, but if you can, that would be great. But that
so
was
you
it.
have my slides. I'm happy to
we have
share them.
his slides.
There's some notes in there that you might delete, but other than that,
All
I'm
right.
happy to share them.
Okay.
You
Yeah,
can share my slides as you have them. I'm happy with that.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Delete the
Yeah.
notes.
All right.
Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. So Chris, you may want to stop the recording. Yeah.